Hi, Carla. I thought your discussion questions for this audio journal 3 were actually really intriguing, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. To what degree should issues such as poverty, mental health, impact on offenders' children, and addiction be considered in sentencing? This is a really multifaceted question, and with the exception of federal crimes, I think most of these, with the exception of impact on children, are considered to some degree, especially in state court cases. Poverty and addiction can really be root contributors to crime, and so I think they should be considered at least, to help determine motive, because they often drive crime. And the example that I can think of is with addiction. I know in the state of Washington they have the TAP, T-A-P program, which is the therapeutic alternative to prosecution. My brother's actually been a part of that prior to his major incarceration, and he was given that opportunity to, receive treatment rather than prosecution. So I think that's a great program. Which they have to finish a complete, strict set of meetings and inpatient, outpatient, whatever they're determined for. But if they don't finish the program, then they're charged and sentenced to the highest extent. They're supposed to be. Most of the time that actually still doesn't happen. But I've actually sat in the family, or not the family, but the regular drug court in Everett, and it's actually quite an emotional experience just to see how much the judge cares, and just to see the supportive environment that they have in drug court. So I think that some of these things really are addressed when it comes to sentencing. But to my knowledge, there's no such program for addressing poverty in the criminal justice system. So that would be something we should definitely look into. Now, the impact on the offender's children, that's really hard to answer. Of course, ideally the answer would be yes, it should be considered. But that's not as easy to do. And so I'm kind of thinking maybe not as much in sentencing, but possibly in having the offender incarcerated in a facility that is, number one, child-friendly, which not many of those exist. And also, number two, the closest possible facility to home. When I worked at Matthew House, a lot of offender families were from Pierce County and Tacoma, and they were usually sent as far away as possible to start with after they were processed through Shelton. And so it just made it unduly hard on these families to travel that far. Even getting to Monroe was really difficult for some families. So I think the impact on offenders' children should be really measured in more placement of the offender rather than in sentencing, just because that's really difficult to measure. And also for the encouragement for the parent to be as involved as possible, and to really build up our parenting programs in prison. I know a lot of women's prisons have the child-friendly visiting facilities, but most men's facilities do not. So I kind of got on a tangent, but that's just the way I feel about the whole thing. And mental health, I think, is already considered to some degree, such as, not being able to seek the death penalty if someone is declared insane. I think some of these things are taken into effect, but maybe not as much as they should be. And on a practical level, what would that look like in the courtroom? We'd need so many more people and different kinds of people. And number one, we would really have to get rid of the mandatory minimums, which I read an article that said it has decreased some in the past decade. But the mandatory minimums are often mostly enforced for drug crimes, and still on a federal level they are for the most part, but I think at the state level they have a little bit more discretion with that. At least as far in my experience. And we would really need compassionate judges, prosecutors, public defenders, and people that understand the intersections of race, class, addiction, adverse childhood experiences, mental illness, you know, some of the things that you had mentioned already. So it would require, you know, more people in the courtroom and more wraparound services, I think. Not just inside the courtroom, but outside the courtroom as well. And the third question, could and should the current system be overhauled in a way to accomplish this in a more comprehensive way? Why or why not? Yeah, it absolutely could be overhauled. Just the same way laws are made, they can be rescinded. And, you know, the mandatory minimum sentences really, really hurt people, hurt families. And I know that last year Jeff Sessions rescinded kind of some Obama-era reforms about mandatory minimums. And honestly, I think it takes getting rid of that guy first, because he has all the private prison connections. And that's, you know, we need a completely overhauled political system here in the first place in the United States. But, you know, and something as far off topic as just limiting campaign contributions and things like that, because, you know, money talks, and that's what make these laws, just like we learned in the 13th documentary with the ALEC committee or whatever that was. So, you know, the whole system really needs to be overhauled, but I think it absolutely could be done. It would certainly be a monumental effort. But for me, especially with my own personal experience with those in prison and their families, it really would make such a huge impact for us as a society, have a healthier society in that way. So those are my thoughts this week. Thanks so much.